I think a reasonable argument can be made that horror is both the hardest and easiest genre to produce media for. It's the hardest because, aside from comedy, it's probably the most subjective genre there is, but it's also the easiest because it allows for a greater number of mistakes. You can have a horror movie, let's say, that has horrible writing, horrible cinematography and music, acting that makes Schwarzenegger look like a Shakespearean thespian, but if the movie legitimately scares you, then you're more willing to overlook those faults. Take my YouTube channel's favorite punching bag, for example, Silent Hill 4. Unfortunately, because I've made more jokes at Silent Hill 4's expense than the internet has collectively made jokes at Ubisoft's most recent output, I've unintentionally obscured my actual feelings towards the game. Though I don't enjoy playing Silent Hill 4 for a variety of reasons, primarily the repetitive and often confusing level design, I still think it's a very good horror game because it has some of the most visceral scares and suffocating atmosphere I've ever seen from the medium. But ever since playing Silent Hill 4, I wonder to what extent my theory of horror media could be tested. Could there be a mainstream movie or a game where, even if it was scary, everything else about it was so horribly put together that it didn't matter? In trying to find an answer to this query, I looked to my audience who, due to my frequent coverage of the Silent Hill franchise, tend to recommend I do analysis videos of other horror games, and by far, the one that has been recommended to me the most was the 2006 PS2 horror game, Rule of Rose. With the preliminary research that I did on the game, I came across the same sentiment expressed from professional critics and players alike. The story was amazing, but the gameplay was more subpar than your dad's golf game. So, naturally, I had to play it to test my theory. Wow, well, on the positive side, Rule of Rose is such a mess. It retroactively made me see Silent Hill 4 for the masterpiece that it is. This is the most conflicted I've ever felt about a game. The only game that comes close for me is probably Drakengard 1, but that's a game I have no problem calling bad even if I respect it as a work of art. With Rule of Rose, saying it's bad would not only feel incorrect, but disrespectful. On the one hand, Rule of Rose has some of the most tedious gameplay, combat that is so broken that even the developers had to apologize for it, and pacing that is more inconsistent than Deadly Premonition's frame rate. But on the other hand, I feel like saying that obfuscates the fact that Rule of Rose has some of the most uniquely unsettling and intelligently presented content I've ever encountered in a horror game. And that's not even the main reason why I feel bad for criticizing it. The main reason is that Rule of Rose represents a certain boldness that most games just don't have today. It originated from an era where game companies were willing to finance more risky projects, ones that deviated from established, reliable formulas, whose design wasn't dictated by a team of shareholders and QA testers trying to ensure maximum appeal. Rule of Rose, on the other hand, felt like it did more to try and separate itself from the Silent Hills, the Resident Evils, and their various clones. It broke new ground regarding what taboo subjects could be explored in games and how they could be explored. Subjects like, say, the way children experience and cope with trauma are maximized for their horror, but are handled with the appropriate amount of grace and at no point feel exploitative. For this reason, amongst others, which I will discuss later on, I want to celebrate this game for daring to try new things, and even if it got a lot wrong, it got a lot of stuff insanely right as well. Before I try to separate the wheat from the chaff, I'm happy to say that the first half of this video contains no story spoilers, save for stuff that happens in the first hour of the game and some commentary on the combat mechanics involved in the first 2 boss fights. So you can watch safely until I give you adequate warning to switch off and go play the game for yourself. Of the many complaints I have for this game, the introduction is certainly not one of them. For the most part, the game takes place in 1930s England. Immediately, the game presents imagery that invokes distrust of what you see. After all, the first shot of the game features the main character, Jennifer, traveling through England's countryside on a school bus at night. In what world would something like this happen? Maybe if Miss Frizzle was on the run from the law and she kidnapped the kids? But she's not British. Or is she? Jennifer wakes up and she's greeted by a young boy, who hands her a badly drawn picture book. When the bus stops, he sprints off the bus and down a dirt road. Jennifer intends to chase after the boy, but before she does, she decides to read the book he handed her. The book is titled The Little Princess, which tells the tale of a young girl whose parents died in a tragic accident, causing her to be sent to an orphanage. And that's it. Immediately, I understood the implication being made. Jennifer is the princess, and she is having trouble remembering her past. A past that is causing her enough stress that it is causing her perception of reality to seem off. Obviously, the amnesiac protagonist isn't unusual in horror media, but I appreciate the boldness in implying this right from the start. Jennifer chases the boy down the road until she happens upon an orphanage, a place that is described as familiar to her. Out front are a pair of hooded children beating a bloody sack senseless. So naturally, instead of calling 911, 999 for the Brits, she decides to investigate. She can't go through the front gate, so she has to make her way to the back of the house and make her way back to the front door. Upon entering, the boy she had been chasing runs upstairs. Now at this point, Rule of Rose has had a decently effective and engaging opening, but that can easily be ruined if you make one simple mistake. For the love of everything that is good and holy, follow the kid up the stairs and do not explore the house. If you let your survival horror gaming instincts kick in, you will spend literally half an hour going around the house expecting to pick up items and weapons only to find nothing. Now I know what some of you are going to say, but Max, there's a lot of environmental detail in the house that sets up parts of the story. Sure, but the likelihood that you're going to remember everything you see over the course of half an hour, especially when your memory is likely to be suppressed by frustration, is nil. By all means though, when you finish the game the first time, then go back and explore the house. I think you will find it to be a much more enriching experience. After finding the boy upstairs, a voice rings out over the orphanage's PA, saying that a funeral is about to begin in the inner courtyard. Before darting downstairs, the boy reveals that the funeral will be for Jennifer's quote-unquote dear friend. Upon entering the courtyard, Jennifer suddenly feels compelled to dig up the body, likely because she wants to remember who this dear friend was. Upon unearthing a coffin, she looks inside to see the bloodied sack from before. But before she can investigate, the little children somehow manage to kick her, a 19-year-old woman, into the coffin and seal her inside. After some time has passed, Jennifer wakes up to find herself tied to a pole inside a Zeppelin of all places. Before she can make sense of the situation, a voice rings out from the airship's PA system. The voice describes himself as the prince of an exclusive club of children, known as the Red Crayon Aristocrats. As a new inductee, Jennifer, along with other members of the Aristocrat Club, must submit a gift by the end of the month. A specific kind of gift that the club predetermines. If Jennifer fails to do this, the prince says he will kill her. And so, the twisted games begin. The first gift she needs to provide is a pretty butterfly. As we begin to search for a butterfly somewhere in the labyrinthian airship, the game's unique sense of pace becomes immediately apparent. Though I did describe it earlier as inconsistent, that doesn't mean that there aren't points in the game where it works, and the opening hour is a pretty good example. For the most part, very little happens in the first hour. You might expect a horrifying image or a creature to pop out when you enter a new area, but you quickly begin to realize that the airship lacks the omnipresent threat that you would find in most other horror games. Not only are there no enemy encounters in the first hour, there's nothing that could reasonably be called a puzzle either. you're mostly just going where the game tells you to go. It's almost like the game is deliberately trying to pull back on as much as possible, even going so far as to remove most of the dialogue from the other non-playable characters, replacing what they say with on-screen subtitles and descriptors reminiscent of a silent film. Though this lack of anything happening contributes to a very slow pace that carries throughout the game, it does pay off in a couple of respects. When something novel does happen, like when you hear a child crying or you see a creepy-looking old man, it has a greater, more unsettling impact than it normally would. When you see something that is clearly meant to be symbolic, something related to the memory that Jennifer is trying to recover, you're compelled to interpret it and extract as much meaning from it that you can. This provokes, maybe not a deeper, but a more unique sense of involvement with the plot that most horror games don't provide. Speaking of unsettling events, at one point in the first hour, you come across the most important thing for any PS2-era horror game heroine. Your dog. But this poor boy named Brown has been left by children to dangle from the ceiling for some reason. I mean, yeah, he probably did something bad and dogs need discipline, but come on, this is like shooting somebody in the leg for stealing a loaf of bread. After you rescue Brown, he will not only accompany you for the rest of the game, but play a large part in your survival. But not because he attacks your enemies, even though he should. Bad boy. Instead, we rely on Brown's nose to seek out items. With most items we pick up, we can toggle a find option in the menu, and then press the triangle button out of menu to order Brown to find either more of that item or something related to your current objective. For instance, toggling the find option on a piece of shortbread, a healing item, will find you more pieces of shortbread, and toggling find on a random hat or cloth you find lying around will lead you to another quest-specific item. Not only is this a pretty interesting mechanic, it's extremely useful when you're trying to orient yourself within the airship. If you find yourself lost at any point, just search your inventory for the quest item, have Brown sniff it, and you will be back on track. However, there are some unintentionally bad side effects to the way this system was implemented, but they only really became apparent to me after the first boss fight. Keep it cool, Max, keep it real. This is where everything begins to fall apart. This boss fight is the second worst boss fight in the history of horror gaming. What's the worst one, you ask? Oh, that happens an hour later, and don't worry, I have a 24-hour cuss fest coming up in just a second for that one. But what makes them both the worst of all time? The fact that you have to fight them with one of the clunkiest, jankiest combat systems ever. There is no defending it, especially when the project lead, Carl Chen, admitted that, quote, the collision and hit detection should have been a bit more fine-tuned. Yeah, no, the collision and hit detection is so bad, it makes the dodge rolling in Silent Hill Homecoming look as finely tuned as a Dark Souls game. Look at this, he's swinging forward, and the light tap of his stick sends Jennifer, who is behind him, flying off of her feet. Answer me this, why can he do that, but if I'm not perfectly positioned in front of him or any other enemy when I swing my weapon, then it misses? How is that fair? So naturally, the first time I fought this guy, I died, which put me back half an hour. Seeing quickly how unfair the combat was, I realized that what I could probably do was search every nook and cranny of the airship that I could for health items so that I could brute force my way through the boss. The problem is that it's hard to keep track of what areas you've already searched beforehand, especially when all the hallways and some of the rooms look the same. And it's never clear if Brown's scent detecting can only reach so far. Like, do I have to travel to another end of the ship before Brown can pick up on the scent of a specific kind of healing item? Or am I just doing it wrong? Anyway, I got a sizable number of health items, and when I fought him again, my strategy was to stay behind him and only swing at him once before trying to run away. Even though 40 to 50% of the time, that single swing didn't give me enough time to run out of his overly sized hitbox that reaches behind him. Even though my strategy worked, I used up all my health items and found myself slowly limping through the already gigantic airship in order to progress. And if you think that sounds bad, remember, this is only the second worst horror game boss fight of all time. The mermaid boss is broken. Broken! Why? One simple reason, her acid vomit attack. Actually, no. Well, maybe it's also hard for a lot of people to determine where she's going to drop from the ceiling if their audio is coming through speakers. But personally, I was able to solve that problem by using headphones. But her acid vomit attack? If you even lightly touch the edge of the acid vomit's area of effects, half of your health is gone. And the likelihood that you can continuously avoid it in this incredibly small room is virtually impossible. Especially when the fight lasts for nearly 15 minutes. To anybody out there who has sensitive hearing, either due to autism like I have or misophonia, imagine hearing this over and over again for 15 minutes. Guys, the only way I was able to get through this was by imagining Mini-Me from Austin Powers going bungee jumping. And once again, just like with the first boss and every other major enemy encounter for the rest of the game, I had to avoid overly generous hitboxes, use up all my health items, and/or limp for 5 minutes until I got to the next section. But you know what? I could probably learn to ignore all of that. The clunky combat mechanics, the terrible boss fights, if the stuff in between them was consistently compelling. And while admittedly some of it is, too much of it isn't. The game greatly disincentivizes organic exploration, which a lot of horror games tend to reward you for. If you go off the beaten path, the chance that you will actually be able to go anywhere new, find a useful item, or find an interesting piece of lore is small. Your best bet is to just have Brown sniff items and lead you where you need to go. But unfortunately, doing that lessens the potential for immersion. Plus, it's not like following Brown is a whole lot less tedious, because often, you're not just using his nose to find healing items. You're also looking for items that you can give to the offering box, which will then give you healing items. And the amount of time you need to spend for some of them is atrocious. Why? Why do I need to find 12 marbles for one freaking piece of shortbread? Why do I need to put these marbles individually into the offering box until I can get that shortbread? And while you are incentivized at first to find certain items that will unlock weapons, like the stick or the revolver, you quickly find out that they barely do any damage, and that you're better off just sticking to a long-range melee weapon like the pipe. So that's the gameplay. You're mostly running back and forth through the same environments which don't have many interesting things going on in them. You spend too much time picking up a multitude of items that either provide or unlock very minimal reward, but you have to spend that time doing it because otherwise, the chance you'll survive a combat encounter is slim. Then you do that for 10 hours. It is miserable. So much so that I will never play Rule of Rose again. But despite all that, I, believe it or not, still struggle to say that this is a bad game. Because if you can be patient with the inconsistent pace, the combat, and the exploration, you will discover a story that is as transgressive and disturbing as it is moving. One that provokes a level of sadness and deep reflection that, at least for me, is probably only bested by Silent Hill 2. Now, unfortunately, I cannot talk any further about why this is without going into story spoilers. If you have never played Rule of Rose and are unsure if you want to, given what I said about the gameplay, I do at least encourage you to watch a cutscene compilation. You have been warned. Whenever I have watched an analysis video of Rule of Rose or read a critique online, the game is almost always compared to the same two pieces of media. One, obviously, is Silent Hill, due to the fact that characters from that franchise, as well as Jennifer, must recall a suppressed memory, one that tries to externalize itself through symbolic environments and monsters. The other piece of media is Lord of the Flies. This makes perfect sense, given that both that story and Rule of Rose feature a collection of kids who find themselves not only secluded from civilization, but adults in general. Except at the beginning, but they get quickly disposed of. This in turn brings out their more primitive, violent instincts, resulting in a society of alphas bullying the weak. While this does make for a cool scenario that provides some solid commentary on the human psyche, which I will get to, I do want to hone in on one thing about this that I've never seen anybody mention. Lord of the Flies is a story about young male bullies and victims, but Rule of Rose is a story about young female bullies and victims. Yes, of course, there are young boys who you find throughout the airship, but the main architects of the bullying, the members of the Red Crayon Aristocrats, are all girls. The reason why this is relevant is because it gives a unique twist to a story that was already so familiar to the Western collective consciousness, and an insightful one at that. Where male bullying tends to be more direct and violent, female bullying tends to be more indirect, covert, and systematic. Women will tend to ostracize and isolate the other women that they are bullying. They will spread rumors or engage in gossip to destroy the reputations of women they find threatening to their status, be it for their good looks, brains, or whatever. Though there is violence occasionally, it is often seen as a last resort, when either the victim or the bully snaps. All of this is on display in Rule of Rose, and it's something that I think the game should seriously be given more attention for. It nailed the psychology and the viciousness exclusive to female bullying. But Rule of Rose's understanding of bullying is not limited to women. There are plenty of bullying universals, for lack of a better term, that both men and women can understand and relate to in Rule of Rose, which is one of the biggest reasons why the horror in Rule of Rose, in my opinion, is so effective. For myself, I can easily understand why Jennifer and the other kids suffer through the bullying, refusing to stand up for themselves. It's because they believe that if they can get on the good side of the bullies and conform to their wishes, then they can enjoy the comforts that come with being in a conformist herd, with being in an aristocrat club, be it literal or metaphorical. For anybody who has been a bully and has repented their behavior, they know they did it as a way to give themselves a false sense of status and control, which they seek out often due to the lack of control over something horrible in their own life. That, or they could just be, jerks. Stop that, Mr. Simpson. The list of universal truisms regarding bullying go on and on. If the victim becomes accepted, they tend to become a bully as a form of survival. And if the bully displeases the group that they're in, they tend to become the victim. The unfortunate fact of these two universals is that both the bully and the victim can never be fully deserving of pure sympathy or contempt, which is a hard lesson that Rule of Rose is constantly trying to impart to the gamer, especially when it tries to provoke the gamer's own inner bully. The primary exhibit I will refer to, of course, is the character of Amanda, the only girl who is ranked lower than Jennifer on the aristocrat hierarchy. When you first meet her, Amanda's appearance and behavior is clearly so atypical that, even if we can suppress a cruel, ridiculing thought about her, the instinct to think that thought surfaces nonetheless. Her uncanny smiles, the over-exaggerated and seemingly maniacal breathing and laughing all contribute to this. But even if you're able to suppress your negative thoughts about her, it becomes all but impossible during Jennifer's first hazing ritual, where Amanda is forced to push a rat against Jennifer's face. At first, it seems like she's uncomfortable with performing the act, but then her face quickly switches into one that seems to take twisted delight in Jennifer's pain. If I was in Jennifer's shoes, I would be determined to heap mounds of ridicule upon her the next time she showed up. But having said that, the next time we see her, she appears to show genuine, tearful remorse. She even begs Jennifer to not hold back in any way when it came time for Amanda to suffer the same fate. At this point, I felt not only bad for her, but horrible that I was ready to thoroughly condemn everything about her, when I probably should have guessed that her state of mind had been twisted from all the bullying she had suffered. Now, of course, she tries to betray Jennifer later on by lying about her, saying she stole a stuffed bear, but even then, I didn't want to bring myself to hate her. For the same reason I couldn't bring myself to hate all the other kids that bully Jennifer. They only do what they do as a form of survival, but not just because they are trying to hold onto the comforts of the hierarchy. They do it because they are trying to gain control over trauma that their undeveloped minds couldn't ever hope to process. The most effective part of Rule of Rose is Jennifer's anamnesis, her large-scale effort to resurface her suppressed memories. As I said before, this suppression is symbolized in a way that's very similar to Silent Hill. where mental contents take on physical form, albeit with one critical difference. The monsters and environments in this game take on forms that are less bloody and decrepit, but more agreeable to the mind of a young child. For instance, a traumatic event that occurred at the orphanage in which Jennifer grew up in will be retold through a picture book using fairy tale prose. Now, eventually, some of this stuff will receive explicit explanation, but a lot of it, due to the uniquely disturbing nature of the content, could only be alluded to in the game's cutscenes and encounters. This, in turn, births a malignant, metastasizing curiosity, due to the fact that all this potentially horrible stuff happened to children. Eventually, if you do stuff like cross-reference the lore items or pay attention to clues on character models, you will figure out what exactly happened to these kids. And when you do, you too will want to suppress it all with a blanket of comforting childhood imagery. No, really, it's so bad that I don't feel comfortable talking about it. And it's not just because doing so will probably get this video demonetized. At the very least though, I will do my best to present a sanitized version of the memory that Jennifer is trying to recover. At a young age, Jennifer was traveling on an airship with her parents from England to India. Unfortunately, the airship crashed due to a technical malfunction, killing everybody inside save for our protagonist. Before Jennifer could be rescued, she was kidnapped by a nearby farmer named Gregory. Gregory had a son named Joshua who recently passed away for reasons unknown, leaving him in a state of despair-induced madness. It was so bad that he decided to dress the young Jennifer up in Joshua's old clothes and cut her hair, so she could serve as a replacement for the son that life so randomly and tragically stole from him. Worse yet, he decided to lock her away in Joshua's old room, just so he wouldn't risk having to lose him again. Thankfully, a young girl named Wendy from a nearby orphanage found Jennifer one day, although she mistook her for a boy, which, in turn, birthed a deep infatuation within her. Due to this, she helped break Jennifer out of her imprisonment and brought her to the orphanage, where the headmaster reluctantly accepted her. Things were great between the two for a long time, although admittedly, Wendy's love for Jennifer was significantly more intense, doing things like send Jennifer endless, effusive love letters. Yet Jennifer was happy to go along with Wendy's behavior simply to make her happy, and maybe to show appreciation for Wendy rescuing her. But that could only last so long. One day, Jennifer discovered a dog named Brown, abandoned in a shed near the orphanage, which she selflessly decides to adopt. Due to this, she had to spend more time looking after the dog, which birthed a seething jealousy and resentment within Wendy, who wanted Jennifer all to herself. Wendy immediately and consistently made her displeasure known to Jennifer, which caused Jennifer to pull further and further away until one day, Wendy snapped. She used the combined efforts of the Red Crayon Aristocrats, a club that she birthed, to do everything possible to ruin Jennifer's reputation and, in turn, leave her feeling isolated and unloved. Due to Jennifer's agreeable and kind nature, she puts up with the abuse. But like Wendy, Jennifer too had her breaking point. After making Jennifer suffer various kinds of physical, verbal, and psychological abuse, Wendy did something unthinkable. She ordered the Red Crayon Aristocrats to steal Brown, put him in a sack, and beat him to death. This was the final straw. Jennifer physically assaults Wendy for this transgression, an act that the Red Crayon Aristocrats celebrate, for they too had to suffer endless abuse from their leader. Ultimately, Wendy was exiled not just from the aristocrats, but she exiled herself from the orphanage. But this wasn't the end of her schemes. She sought out Gregory and manipulated his psychotic state by dressing up like his son Joshua. Her efforts were so successful that his mind regressed to that of an animal. The result of this was the birth of a legend inside the orphanage. the legend of Stray Dog, who would come and eat any children that weren't perpetually on guard. Unfortunately, one day, Stray Dog came and took his prey. Wendy ordered Stray Dog to massacre all the children of the orphanage, leaving Jennifer for last. Not willing to let Wendy win, Jennifer decides to fight back. And depending on what action the player takes, they will receive one of two endings. Jennifer can either defeat Gregory as she would any other boss, or she can hand him a revolver, which he uses to self-terminate. The former ending is considered the bad ending, because it results in Jennifer ending up all alone, and what I interpret as her trauma consuming her. The latter ending is considered the good ending though, because Jennifer appears to do something that nobody else in the game was able to do. In what appears to be a flashback to her youth, Jennifer embraces Wendy and locks her inside the orphanage, and then she embraces Brown and locks him inside a shed. I and many other people take this to be a symbolic acceptance and progression beyond the trauma that had gripped Jennifer for her entire life. She, unlike the other kids, realizes that the only way to truly surmount the trauma was not through aggression towards others or false comfort in groups that don't really care about you. The only way to do it was to forgive herself and the other kids, to realize that they only acted the way they knew how to in the twisted circumstances they found themselves in, to cope with tragedy that no child should ever have to experience. And through that forgiveness, Jennifer could finally let go. It's a powerful, positive message found amidst one of the bleakest scenarios I have ever encountered in a video game. One that most people won't be able and/or willing to experience due to the game's often obtuse game design. Even if you are willing to play it, good luck finding a way to play it legally. Seeing that copies of this game are rarer than a Californian politician that's faithful to their wife, the prices for this game on eBay are ridiculous. No game is worth $400, especially one as broken as Rule of Rose. Nonetheless, I can confidently say that while I found playing the game infuriating, I will primarily look back on Rule of Rose with fondness, for both its boldness and its unapologetic originality. But what do you guys think of Rule of Rose? Is it one of your favorite horror games? Are you somebody that actually likes the gameplay and the combat? I really want to hear from you in the comment section below. Finally, make sure to hit the like button if you liked this video, and make sure to subscribe for more gaming analysis. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.